Have you seen all that sunshine? Bloody hell. Rare event in England. It's a beautiful day. Yo, what's happening? This is Mitekiss. I've put together 8 vocal processing tips that I think will help people starting out on getting vocal recordings sounding nice. I'm using Cubase 10. Let's jump in. So this is my track 17 featuring Pixie Cola. I've taken a small section of the vocals and I'll show you how I produce them at the same time running through my vocal processing steps. I've got my list. Step 1, layering your vocals, making sure they all line up, getting some width and just generally setting the vocal up. I'm going to play you the main take with the backing track.
You say I'm not what you needed for it. You stray from the tides the moon does provide.
I've got my 2 additional takes here underneath, and what I want to do is make sure they are all in alignment so my vocals sound solid. You can see visually already that they are not. There are 2 ways of doing this. We can get the computer to do it for us, or we can do it manually. But before we align them, let's play it all together so you can hear what it sounds like.
You say I'm not what you needed for it.
So not bad going, but we can hear they are slightly out of time. So let's use the built-in tool, Open Audio Alignment Panel. We are going to use that as our reference, and then our targets are these 2 channels down here. And we're going to use match words because we want to match words. And I always use the precision at about 96 because 100 is a little bit too much. Let's have a look at what it's done. You can actually see, if I undo that and redo, you can see it's actually time stretched. So you've got to check that that is what you want. So when you play it back.
You say I'm not what you needed for it.
So I'm actually not going to use the robot in this instance. I am going to do it manually, and I'm going to do that by cutting sections and lining them up visually like so. I'll speed up this whole process and meet you at the end, otherwise it will bore you to death. Right, so that now is sounding a lot tighter. I will play you exactly how it is.
You say I'm not what you needed for it.
And what I want to do is use these 2 layers as backing tracks really. So I'm going to push them left and right. So my first one, and I'll write this down, vocal left, and then we're going to do vocal right. I'm going to do the same, R70. So we get some width, listen to the difference.
You say I'm not what you needed for it.
Makes such a difference, just that simple little trick. This moves me nicely on to the next step. Step 2, grouping, bussing, same thing. So I'm going to group all of these vocals to one bus, one vocal group, as you can see. So I've now got control of all 3 of them from one place, and I can affect all of them at the same time if needed. However, I also want to group my 2 backing vocals because I want to treat them differently. So I'm going to group channel to selected channels, and I'm going to call these backing vocals. We'll now have independent control of these 2. So we could color code this if we were being color codey, and we could keep that one purple. And then I can adjust the level here, right?
You say
Independently.
I'm not what you needed for it.
I'm then going to send this backing vocal bus to the vocal group bus, so it's a bit like a chain. Clip gain and manual automation. Before I compress, I don't want to overuse a compressor, so I'm going to manually adjust some peaks here. I'm going to go along and make some cuts where I can see there are some peaks. This will help if I expand these channels a bit. Look, manually just drop them down a bit. Maybe this one. Let's cut here. And let's take those 3 and maybe just bring that peak down. I want not an exact level across the board, but I want a loose, nothing, no extremes, either quiet or loud.
I'm not what you needed for real.
That sounded right. I think, in fact, they're the only two real ones that stood out.
You stray. I'm not what you needed.
So moving into step 4, compression and EQ. So first up, I am going to mute my backing vocals and I want to just EQ the primary vocal. I'm going to do it on the vocal group because they're quite similar takes. I think the EQ is going to work well across all of them. So I'm going to use FabFilter, my favorite EQ. I always like to duck mids and I'm just going to boost them 5K probably, especially on a female voice.
I'm not what you needed for real.
Roll off that bottom, you know, we don't need a lot of that rumble. Subtle EQ at this point.
From the tides, the moon does provide. You stray. From the tides, the moon does provide.
Generally, you know, little tweaks just to help it along. Now let's look at some compression. My favorite vocal compressor is by Waves. It's called Arvox. It's so simple and there's not many controls, so I'm just going to leave that aside for 1 second because if you haven't got that, you may want to see it through a normal compressor. So let's push the whole group through this compressor.
I'm not what you needed for.
You can already see it hitting some words.
You say.
That say, for example. Let's increase the attack. Let's get a faster attack. Faster release. We'll keep the ratio low because, again, I don't want the compression to be obvious.
I'm not what you needed for real.
That's sounding quite nice. We can now hear the headphone leak, which is fine. We can cut that out manually or we can use a gate. So jumping back to the Waves Arvox here, we can see the gate and we can hear the difference. Once this take, with it off, listen to the headphone noise come in. Now just, we can see it's about here.
You so real.
Personally, here's a better trick. See you later. Let's just fade the ends and outs. Then you don't have to worry about that at all.
For real.
Next up, parallel compression. It allows me to get all the little intricacies of words into the mix without ruining the original take. I don't want to overhit the main lead with a compressor, like I've said a billion times. So I'm going to do that on a duplicate track and then just fade back in the top end to give more clarity to some of the phrases. So I'm going to smash this with this compressor. I'm going to put the attack and release up. I'm going to put the ratio up.
You stray. From the tides, the moon does provide.
Purposely overdoing it here. Now let's bring up an EQ. We want just this nice air.
I'm not what you needed for real.
I've actually got a nice MAAG EQ here by Plugin Alliance, and this has an air band, which is actually really useful for something like this. Good on drums too. And yes, it sounds extreme, of course, but we are going to fade this in very subtly underneath. I'm going to take this out of the vocal group because I don't want the effects to happen twice. So I'm just going to my main stereo out, turn this down, and fade it back in until it starts to sound nice.
You stray.
Let's just turn those backing vocals off for a second. Just going to have to turn up the output on this compressor a bit so we can hear it.
From the tides, the moon does provide.
Quite a subtle effect, but you get that nice airy sound, especially on those held notes like this one. I'm going to start to balance this in the mix now, so we can start to hear a kind of more finished sounding vocal.
I'm not what you needed for real.
Okay, sounding nice that level. Let's bring in the parallel. Now the backing vocals. And now some effects, reverb and small delay. Right, so first up, I want to look at some reverb. I'm going to do it on a send, just because I like having more control. So I'm going to look at my Valhalla vintage verb. Let's call this vocal reverb. I'm going to look at the 1970s color just because that's what I like. So I'm going to send the entire group to this reverb. Let's just turn that on and let's turn that down. So what I want to look at really is low cut. We want to remove that. We don't need so much decay. Let's have a listen. Let's change the room to a plate. Let's turn this pre-delay down a bit.
From the tides, the moon does provide. You say I'm not what you needed for real.
Sounding nice. I'm gonna let the reverb into a bit more of the top end.
You stray from the tides, the moon does provide.
And so by doing the reverb on a send like this, that we can control the volume, we can control the EQ independently. For example, we can see all the EQ here if we wanted to.
I'm not what you needed for real.
So you could just have reverb only on the very, 1000 plus. Look.
You stray
Depending on the effect you're going, I actually want a lot of it in the body as well, but
from the tides, the moon does provide.
they're starting to sound quite nice. I also like to do a little delay, and I use XT Delay Replica by Native Instruments, one of my go-tos. There is actually, under vocal, there's one called Pop Vocal, which I just think is so nice. Very subtle.
You say
I'm going to change the delay time to like 1/4. We're going to put the mix right down. So we're talking like 3%.
I'm not what you needed for.
You can hear how subtle that is, but when it's in the mix, I just love that effect.
You say I'm not what you needed for real.
Using track spacer or sidechain to just help the vocal part. This is not really going to work in this example because I've got my whole backing track is one audio channel, but let's say you were in a project with multiple channels, and let's say this was actually a guitar, and the guitar was kind of that mid frequency that occupies a similar space to Pixie's vocal. What I would consider doing is using track spacer to just give the vocal room. So on my guitar channel here, again, we're pretending this is a guitar. I would load up, say, track spacer, and I would then get my sidechain input, and I would add the main vocal as my trigger.
Not what you needed for real.
So you can hear, you see how the vocal is ducking that entire channel. It's effectively a sidechain, but from the vocal. But what we could do, say, is we can use the low pass and the high pass here to just impact, say, that mid region that I was talking about. So like 400-500 to like 3,000-4,000. Let's turn that right down. Imagine this was just a guitar track.
You stray from the tides, the moon does.
What something like this will allow is the guitar to play really nicely when there's no vocal. For example, imagine this bit. But then when the vocal comes in, the vocal just starts to duck the guitar a little bit when those phrases come through. So it's a really clever way of getting presence out of a vocal as well. Lastly, de-esser and breathwork. So my last step is de-essing and breathwork. I'm going to create some space for my de-esser because I actually want my de-esser to come in before the compressor. So in terms of the order, we're going to put it in here. I'm just going to use the Cubase built-in one. And I just want to catch any sibilants. There are some presets. Female S less.
You say I'm not what you need.
I'll do it extreme so you can hear what it sounds like. We'll push that right down.
From the tides, the moon does provide.
We can adjust this frequency here to catch where the S's are.
You say.
So that say is obviously an obvious one.
You say.
We can adjust the release time. We can adjust how much the reduction happens.
You say.
So if we turn that down,
You say.
we get slight reduction. Threshold. So when do we want it to kick in?
You say.
I'm going to go quite hard on this.
You say I'm not what you needed for real. Stray from the top.
And see, that sounds quite natural. Now if I turn it off and listen back,
You say,
you'll really hear the sibilance.
you say,
So it's definitely worth considering. And finally, look at breath work, right? So in the vocal take, you would have heard some breathing. And it's kind of personal preference. I, most of the time, like to lose it.
you say,
And so we've got that same breath work on these. Let's remove that. Let's just tidy those up a little bit.
I'm not what you needed for real.
Sometimes it can sound really nice.
You,
Or you could just, you know, we could be more subtle with it. So we can hear that breath there and we could just lower that clip right down and maybe only have it on the main lead, not on the parallel, not on the back end vocals. Let's remove these. Let's just fade these out. So it's just there.
you stray from
That one I don't think we need.
the tides the moon does provide. From the tides the moon does provide.
And that about sums up my basic vocal processing. So as I said, that's my basic vocal processing tips. I hope that's helped some of you lot. Usual like and subscribe and all that naughtiness if you want to see some more of these videos. I think I'm going to make some cheese on toast and go and sit out there. Peace.